Welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is Dr. Gabor Mate, a physician specializing in addiction and trauma, public speaker, the author of 5 books. In fact, we spoke with him about In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, one of his most recent books. His new one is called The Myth of Normal, and this is a fascinating work. His website, Dr. Gabor Mate, drgabormate.com. and drgabormate on Twitter as well. Dr. Mate, welcome back to the program. It's been a while since we've spoken, and it's great to have you with us. Why the myth of normal?
Well, I have to say, first of all, thank you for having me, Tom. And the name is Gabor. Forget the Dr. Mate a bit. You were a bit modest in not mentioning the subtitle of my book, which is Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. And when I say you were a bit modest, is I actually stole the subtitle from you, in the sense that in your book, The Last Hours of Ancient Sunshine, I think, or something like that was the call, you talked about a culture can be either toxic or nourishing, murderous or nurturing. And I lifted that toxic culture directly from you. So thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome. I'm honored.
But why the myth of normal? It's precisely because what this culture takes to be normal and is actually unhealthy and unnatural and is toxic, to use your phrase. As a physician, I'm trained to look at the normal range within which life is possible, normal range of blood pressure, normal range of blood chemistry, blood acidity, temperature, and so on. And so what is normal is identified with healthy and natural. But we make the mistake of assuming that what is normal, what is the norm in our society, is also healthy and natural. In fact, I'm saying that what is normal in our society, in terms of how we treat each other, the way we think about human nature, the way we raise kids, the way we work, the way we relate to each other or to the earth in general, is actually toxic and unhealthy. So normality in that sense is a myth. And the other myth is that there's those of us that are healthy and those that are not. In fact, health is on a spectrum, and whether we're looking at mental health conditions or physical health conditions, there's a wide spectrum. And to try and separate the abnormal ones from the normal ones is a very polarizing exercise. Talk about polarization. Furthermore, the illnesses that people develop of mind and body are very often highly normal responses to abnormal circumstances.
That's a really important point, that our bodies and minds are constantly trying to establish homeostasis, for lack of a better word, some sort of normal midline, a comfortable place to live and be. And in a bizarre situation or circumstance or world, that can look very unusual. Am I making sense here?
Absolutely. So to give an example that you and I are both interested in, we may not agree, but I'll just give you my point of view on it. Take a condition like ADHD, where the difficulty paying attention, the automatic tuning out. Now, this is often said to be a genetic disease. And I know you and I, although we might have different views on it, we see it neither as, we certainly don't see it as a disease.
Right.
And what I say, that the tuning out, the absent-mindedness, is actually a coping mechanism of a young child living in conditions of stress. And so that when a child is stressed and they can't change the situation or to leave it, their mind will tune out as a way of self-protection. So it's a normal adaptation. And if you look at why are more and more kids being diagnosed with this condition, partly is due to the fact that the parenting environment, through no fault of individual parents, but owing to the extreme stress in society, has become so difficult and so stressed that more kids are responding by tuning out. So rather than seeking the pathology in the child, we have to look at what is it in the environment, what is abnormal in the environment that the tuning out is a normal response to.
Right.
And I say that it's stress.
Yeah, or in the school system, for that matter. I mean, if we're talking about kids.
Yeah.
What is it about the schools that is producing these kinds of behaviors that are defined as pathology? The critique of culture, I think, is a really important one, and I'd like you to speak a little more about that. We have roughly 10% of the American population is on some sort of psychoactive drug right now, according to some reports. I don't know that there's any reliable numbers out there. If there are, you probably know them better than me, and feel free to correct me. But a lot of people are on these drugs, and the family of drugs that particularly concerns me are the SSRIs, because they're so terribly addictive. I've had several friends now try to withdraw from SSRI drugs and talk about experiencing electric shocks in their brains and just frantic emotional states that are way beyond where they were when they first went on these drugs. We've talked with Peter Breggin, who I realize is quite controversial, a number of times about the percentage of school shooters who are on SSRI drugs. I realize that for some people these drugs save their lives, but that said, it seems like there's just really, really widespread use of psychoactive prescription drugs in the United States. Obviously we've got tobacco and alcohol and coffee, which are psychoactive drugs also, but I'm trying to separate out the pharmaceuticals. What are your thoughts on all that?
Well, first of all, I think the figures are higher than 10%. Certainly amongst women, 25% of women are on some psychiatric medication.
Whoa.
And we can talk about why women rather than men. That's an interesting cultural conversation in itself. Maybe we'll get to it. But it's a very high percentage. And as you and I both know, more and more kids are being medicated. I mean, millions of kids are being medicated. And some kids are being medicated with antipsychotic drugs.
Yeah.
Not for psychoses, but just to control their behaviors. And what we have here is a massive social experiment in the chemical control of children's brains. When I say experiment, because nobody had done studies on what the long-term effects are.
Right.
What we do know is that in adults, long-term antipsychotic cause negative brain changes. Well, let's assume that the same thing is happening to developing brains of our children. That's a massive experiment in messing with children's brains. Now, the SSRIs, when you said that your friends were addicted, I will rephrase that slightly. They were not addicted, they were dependent. It's not the same. Addiction, in my definition, is manifested in any behavior that a person craves and experiences pleasure or relief from in the short term, but then suffers negative consequences, not give up. So that's what an addiction is. A dependence is somewhat different. A dependence is something when you withdraw from it, you get withdrawal effects. What your friends are experiencing is not sort of a craving and a pleasure and a desire for it. What they're experiencing is the chemical withdrawal. So they're quite right, and you're quite right in describing their experience. That can be quite horrendous coming off the SSRI drugs, but it's not the same. Not quite the same as an addiction.
Right.
So addictions often have dependence as an aspect, but not all dependence is an addiction. Do you see what I mean?
I do. But
Okay. Now, coming back to the SSRIs, I've taken them myself, and they helped me. As a matter of fact, I took them in my 40s, and I didn't know how depressed I had been until I was no longer depressed. After only a few days. And I said to my sister-in-law, you mean people can feel like this normally? I had no idea. There was a book in the 60s published, I've been down so long, it feels like up to me. And that's what my depression had been for me. I was so used to it. I thought, this is normal.
Right.
So, yes, as you suggested, these medications can be helpful. But there's a huge but here. Number one, the assumption that people are depressed because they don't have enough serotonin in their brain, so let's give them a medication to elevate serotonin levels, is completely false. Now, if you went to the example is sort of a trivial one, maybe a banal one, but if you went to a party and you were feeling kind of shy, but you had, and so you're sitting in a corner by yourself, and then you had a shot of bourbon, and then you became sociable and voluble and articulate and confident, would that prove that your social shyness was caused by a lack of bourbon in your brain?
Right.
Well, in the same way, we can't assume that giving somebody an SSRI corrects a problem that's due to a lack of serotonin, which is supposed to be the cause of depression. There's no proof for that theory whatsoever. Zero. As a physician, I used to tell my patients, "Oh, you're lacking serotonin. Let's give you some." No proof for it whatsoever. I just bought the Kool-Aid. Now I looked at the research, and other people have looked at it. There's no such evidence. So the fact that something can work sometimes doesn't prove that you've explained the cause. Now, if you actually look at depression, what does the word mean? What does it mean to depress something? It means to push it down. What gets pushed down in depression? Emotions, feelings. So you have what's called a flat affect. Everything is pushed down. Why would people push down their emotions? You've never met a one-day-old baby that pushes down their emotions.
Right.
The pushing down of emotions is another adaptive dynamic when in your family of origin, the child's natural tendency to experience and express all their emotions is discouraged or even punished, the child will push down their emotions in order to fit in with the environment. And that's where depression starts. Wow. Is in early trauma, where you have to push down your emotions in order to be accepted. And let's take a worst case scenario, which is not all that infrequent. A child that suffers abuse of some kind, such as physical punishment or sexual abuse or emotional assault. What's their natural tendency? Is to be angry and to fight back. Can they afford to do that? That would leave them into more trouble. So the brain's defensive mechanism is they push down the anger. And that's what's pushed down more often in depression. So therefore, to give somebody an SSRI,
it's like dealing with symptoms rather than cause, in other words. I'm sorry we're out of time. We've hit a break that I can't stop here. But you can read all about it in the book, The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture by Dr. Gabor Mate. Gabor, thank you so much for dropping by.